In June 1772, Jean Benjamin de Laborde published a prospectus announcing, quote, an absolutely new kind of publication of what he called Chansons Pittoresque. While there seemed to be new collections of songs published all the time, he wrote, his Choix de Chansons would differ by presenting a combination of image, music, and text. This prospectus provides a valuable insight into the production of Laborde's songbook project, and from it we learn about the many of the publication's peculiarities, the extra songs that were there to ensure that the high quality paper wouldn't be wasted. But perhaps most telling is that the scores, he tells us in the prospectus, were written for the harp, which happens to be the Dauphine Marie Antoinette's favorite instrument. The prospectus for Laborde's Choix de Chansons project sheds new light on his strategy to ingratiate himself with the next generation of French royals, and it reveals a double game of artistic commissions as both a money-making scheme, he was a real entrepreneur, but also a strategy for maintaining court hierarchies in the Ancien Régime. I shouldn't have chosen grey, shall I? So here he is. This is I was really excited to see this. This was recently a portrait of Laborde that was recently sold at auction just last year. In 1772, Laborde was in a precarious situation. His cousin and supporter, the Marquise de Pompadour, Louis XIV's long-term maîtresse en titre and close friend, had died from tuberculosis in 1764. Pompadour had helped him to gain his position of premier valet de chambre to the king, Louis XV, an office that guaranteed a close access to the court. Laborde himself was a decadent bon viveur, and he was not yet married, but had fathered a daughter to the famous ballerina and courtesan Marie Madeleine Guimard. And you see Guimard here in an unusual, I think, portrait by Jacques-Louis David, who we think more of as being a rather...
it may not even be a David.
So Mark is an expert, Mark Levery, expert on portraits of Jacques-Louis David, is questioning the attribution here. It looks, but I thought it looked dodgy, so I was on the right track. Okay. So Laborde, his debts were mounting to a vast sum, nearly 500,000 livres. That's a huge amount. 500,000 livres back in the Ancien Régime is a vast amount of money. When Louis XV died in 1774, and as he was equally responsible for the gambling debts of his erstwhile mistress. The king had made several promises to rectify Laborde's terrible finances, but none of this was fully honoured. The heirs apparent to the French crown were very different to their grandfather. He was actually grandfather to them both. Marie Antoinette had married her first cousin, Louis Auguste, at 14 years old. She was the daughter of the powerful Austrian Empress, Marie Theresa, and had spent an idyllic childhood in the palaces of Hofburg and Schönbrunn. She was pretty, elegant, and musical and timid. She had learned to play the harp, harpsichord, and flute under the instruction of Christophe Villebard Gluck. The Dauphine, as she was styled before Louis XV's death, and her young husband were both naive and prudish. Quite the opposite of their grandfather, whose prodigious appetites for beautiful women earned him the moniker of Louis le Bien-Aimé, the well-loved. It's a bit of a pun. The Dauphine was shocked by the louche climate of the French court. The king's latest favourite, Madame de Barry, was hated by aristocratic snobs like the Dauphine, who thought her beneath them. But she had to pay Du Barry due reference because she was the king's mistress. This was such who famously comes up in every biopic of Marie Antoinette. She has to sort of, oh, here's the horrible Du Barry that I have to be nice to. Laborde was in trouble. As Pompadour's cousin and a man who helped Du Barry to attain her place at court, his reputation was sullied in the eyes of the young royals. The king had made generous offers that would clear, as I say, Laborde's debts, but none of them had come to fruition. He was one disaster away from absolute ruin. If the King of France died, he might easily go bankrupt. And this is the climate of mid-1772, when Laborde published the prospectus offering a subscription for a luxurious publication. The Choix de Chansons may well have been dedicated to Madame la Dauphine to get into the young princess's good graces. Louis XV was still alive and would have supported his friend Laborde in that endeavour, no doubt. The prospectus was published by the royal printer Laurent François Pro, who had taken over the Imprimerie de Pro after the death of his father Pierre in 1768. And surely it's no coincidence that Laborde advertised that the musical scores had been written for the harp, as I say, which was Marie Antoinette's favorite instrument. Choix de Chansons was a money-making scheme too. The very first lines of the prospectus suggest that the published collection of songs were a burgeoning market, perhaps even a very profitable one, and he hoped that his contribution would be the finest of them all. The unique selling point was the triple advantage of amusing the mind by gay and interesting verses, of flattering the ear with an easy and agreeable song, and finally to attracting the eyes by pictures rendered with all perfection. Laborde had excellent connections to the Paris art world. His cousin, the Marquis de Marigny, was Surintendant des Bâtiments du Roi, the superintendent of the king's works, the sort of person in charge of most royal commissions in the arts, and in charge indeed of the decoration of royal palaces. Laborde's mistress, La Guimard, held one of the most fashionable salons of the age, frequented by artists and intellectuals. Laborde, was also a friend of Voltaire, who wrote the score, and he wrote a score to one of the Philosophes' opera, Pandore. He had known the premier peintre du roi, François Boucher, as they were both members of a Masonic society called Le Caveau, where many of the songs Laborde published in Choix de Chansons may have been debuted, just something that we think might have happened. Laborde was in an excellent position to convince Boucher's collaborator and a leading peintre graveur, which is a term that means somebody who both designs and then engraves also the plates for the engravings. Jean-Michel Moreau, called Moreau le Jeune. Nothing you find. And this is a self-portrait of Moreau le Jeune that was sold to a private collection in February 2020. I don't know if you've seen that one, Mark. The prospectus tells us that the initial plan was to produce 2 small volumes in octavo, approximately 22 by 15 centimeters, and each would contain 25 songs accompanied by a fine engraving. Half the scope of the final publication, indeed, which ran to 4 volumes with 100 song sets in total. To ensure that none of the, quote, very beautiful paper on which the books were to be printed was wasted, and to leave as few pages useless as possible, verses for another song would be added if there was room on the page. The second song would not be illustrated, however. Aside from the promises of fine quality, the main innovation of Choix de Chansons was the inclusion of an engraving of a, quote, painterly subject for each of his songs. And this is what made Choix de Chansons and again, a quote, absolutely new proposition on the market. Laborde took advantage of his connections to the Académie Royale de Musique, known as the Opéra, and enlisted Pierre-Nicolas de Lormel, printer to the Royal Academy of Music on the Rue de Foin Saint-Jacques, to handle not only the publication, but to collect money from subscribers. Like many 18th century publishers, Laborde hoped to cover the costs of production by obtaining payment in advance. Okay, so to recap, Laborde wanted to collect money in advance for obvious reasons, as I've just described. He was deeply in debt. And that was the purpose of this document, the prospectus, to whet the appetite of music lovers and bibliophiles who could pay 24 livres, which is 50% of the 2-volume publication cost, in advance. Delivery of the first volume was promised for the 1st of January 1773, at which time subscribers would pay another 24 livres in advance for the second volume, due to come out on July the 1st of the same year. Subscribers had the advantage of paying 50% less than those who bought Choix de Chansons after publication. They would also have their names listed in the publication, advertising their largesse in support of the arts. Laborde must have been hoping that his wealthy friends would support the project. And as an extra incentive, subscribers were encouraged to order multiple copies. And anyone who ordered 12 copies would receive the 13th for free. It does sound like an Instagram viral ad to me, but I think this is very much this idea. He was hoping to generate great interest. But that was not the only incentive offered in the prospectus. The sample set of title page, illustration, musical score, and lyrics that followed the advertisement was offered as so the public can judge the merit of this work, with the sample being Les Amours, de Glycère et d'Alexis, and it's a romance, a type of a song. So the loves of Glycère and Alexis, and it corresponds to the second song set in the first volume of Choix de Chansons as it was actually published. It's a fashionable pastoral subject found in plays, poems, and operas and paintings of mid-18th century France. And I'm going to take advantage now and play you some music. Yes, that play music. So this recording, as I've noted here, was one of the recordings we made at ANU. The song tells the story of youthful Alexis, who had loved the pretty shepherdess Glycère from afar for 2 years. One day, when he sees Glycère's mother working in the field, he runs to her door and declares his undying affection. Glycère receives Alexis' advances with humility and moral reticence. You can't come in, we can be overheard, she says. Alexis makes Glycère promise to meet him the next morning when she takes her sheep to the meadow. It's a moral tale that predictably ends badly for the young shepherdess, as you can imagine. So ultimately, as you can see in this little part from the song, the next morning the shepherdess wanted to honor her vow, but it's claimed that the poor thing lost much in acquitting herself. So she fulfilled her vow of meeting the shepherd, but lost at the price of her virtue. In this illustration, Moreau-le-Jeune chose to capture the moment of Alexis' declaration of love rather than Glycère's fall. Alexis kneels precariously on the steps before Glycère, and his hat under his arm is there as a sort of show of gallantry. The frisson of his sentiment is animating his hair and fingers. I think you can see this is, shows you what a great printmaker, in fact, Moreau-le-Jeune was. In the background is the shadow figure of Glycère's mother working in the fields. In the foreground appears a mother hen and her chicks, and above them 2 doves appear to kiss before the dovecot. These avian metaphors are rather heavy-handed. The hen and her brood remind us of Glycère's mother behind them, hinting at maternal care, while simultaneously suggesting that children might result from amorous liaisons. Doves symbolize romantic affection, and the idiom to bill and coo derives from their behavior. Moreau has shown one dove flying to meet its mate, beak to beak, while another sits close to the edge, beating its wings in preparation to fly the nest. Just like the young Glycère, the fledgling dove is not quite ready for independence. Typical of the pastorals and genre themes painted by François Boucher and Jean-Baptiste Greuze from the 1740s on, Moreau draws upon well-established tropes inspired by popular theatre of the day. Pictures of pastoral fantasies, peopled by well-dressed peasants in fashion, very fashionable, in fact, in their silks and linens and culottes, are more like the aristocrats who would dress up to stage entertainments for one another to stave off the ever-present ennui. Moreau's treatment of the subject, somewhere between that of Boucher and Greuze, and I've got Greuze here, mainly because of the little hen and chicks in the foreground. You can see that that's a trope that was used. Where Boucher's shepherds and shepherdesses were captured in moments of sort of romantic affection, Greuze would often depict the sorry aftermath, and where Boucher would paint sort of rosy-cheeked lovers, Greuze would often have a sobbing maid. The sample engravings of the Prospectus differ to those of the final publication. Placing Moreau's 2 etchings side by side reveals their subtle differences. This is a spot the difference exercise for all of those who want to engage with this. Glissaire's body casts a shadow on the door frame in the final publication. The stone wall next to that shadow is more rusticated, so it's more rough. And the detail of the vine leaves next to the upper window differs too. This doesn't reflect a substantial revision, however. Both versions of the print demonstrate Moreau's mastery of the burin, which is the little tool you use to engrave. The title page is also different. I don't have a copy of it here, I don't think. No. The title page is also different, sorry. The simple font of the prospectus version is exchanged for a more elaborate form. The final word romance, indicating the sentimental mode of the song, has been elided from the 1773 publication. The music engraving differs too, and notably the intonation of the words depuis and glisser in the first line are more attenuated in the final version. Okay, and I'm showing you here also what's changed in the final version. An extra song has been added. So you can see how it actually works when it's been put together so that both back and front of the page are used. An extra song has been added to fill the 5th page of the song set in the final publication, and that is the standard format that we find in the final publication. The illustration comes first, printed on one side of the sheet of paper. Let's go back. So that's the illustration first, then you have the title page, and then verso, you have the score, and so on. If the main song finishes on page 3 or 4, as it does in the case of Les Amants de Glycère and Galaxie, another song is added to ensure that all 5 pages are filled. This is what Laborde had planned, as he noted in the prospectus, to leave as few pages as possible. The publication of the prospectus of Choix de Chansons also led to a remarkable afterlife of the story of Glycère and Alexis. Laborde's poem was later reset to music and composed by, as we've heard, the philosophe Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And we know that it was taken from Laborde's prospectus because of the words "Paroles tirées d'un prospectus de Monsieur Laborde" is written at the top of Rousseau's score. A radical Enlightenment thinker, Rousseau proposed that humankind had an innate moral sense that had been corrupted by religion and society. It led him to argue for a return to nature, a dictum that was ironically taken up with great gusto by aristos who loved to play at pastoral life, epitomized by the fantasy amour created for Marie Antoinette in the gardens of the Petit Trianon. Rousseau was a polymath, a philosopher, writer, and composer, and he returned to the theme continually across his work. The romantic tale of Glycère and Alexis appealed to Rousseau's fascination for the topic of natural urges, love, and morality. It appeared in a collection of songs composed by him, titled Les Consolations et Misères de ma vie, ou Recueil de romances, Consolations of My Life's Miseries, or Collection of Romances. Curiously, the names of subscribers, there we go. The names of subscribers do not appear in the publication of Choix de Chansons, finally, as Laborde had promised they would in his prospectus, and we can only speculate the reasons for that. The project did little to alleviate Laborde's precarious financial situation. He was still borrowing large sums of money from his friends in October of 1772, 4 months after the subscription was published. Moreau produced 11 engravings in 1772, 7 in 73, and a final 7 in 74. Those were the 25 engravings that complete the first volume of Choix de Chansons. The project took longer to complete than anticipated, and the subscribers would have to wait at least 18 months, more than expected, to see the first volume appear. We do not know why Moreau only completed 25 illustrations when 50 were commissioned from him. Did he work too slowly? Was the financially troubled Laborde unable to pay him? We may never be sure. But if financial difficulty was the reason Moreau left the project, it's all the more surprising that Laborde chose to double down and expand Choix de Chansons to 4 volumes with 100 songs in total. It could be that Moreau, being the most sought-after engraver of the day, was slow to produce the 50 prints that Laborde had commissioned, and given his financial troubles, Laborde may have been slow to pay too, and that would have done nothing to motivate Moreau to work faster. Perhaps when Laborde realized that he'd overpromised his subscribers, he decided to expand the publication to provide a cover story for the delay. This is just my speculation. And then to engage a team of artisan engravers to complete the work. Moreau continued to work on his engravings for the first volume until 74, despite the title page of the publication being given as 73. The engravings in volumes 2, 3, and 4 are designed by Labouteau, Le Barbier, and Saint-Quentin, and engraved by Masquelier and Ney. they're not actually dated, so we're not quite sure when second, third, and fourth volume illustrations were engraved. An article by Jean-François de la Harpe in the Mercure de France announces that the fourth and final volume was published at the end of 1775. And it seems likely then that those other artists were engaged at some point in 74 to work until 75 to finish the publication. Today, when we think of the French fashion for pastorals, it's Marie Antoinette's famous Amour and the grounds of the Petit Trianon that come to mind. The pastoral themes of Laborde's Choix de Chansons ought to have appealed to the young royal, especially as she'd loved music, and these scores had been written for her favorite instrument. A copy of Choix de Chansons, bearing Marie Antoinette's coat of arms, is held in the collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. The 4 volumes are bound with end pages of watered silk in duck egg blue, and they even retain their original ribbons to keep the page. Sadly, we have no evidence that the Dauphine ever played from these volumes. Marie Antoinette's copies, held in the BNF, are in perfect condition with no signs of wear. Perhaps Laborde's gesture did not hit its mark, and those volumes sat silently on the Queen's bookshelves, even as the guillotine fell for both Marie Antoinette in 1793 and for Laborde the year later. Thank you.